Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we are talking with Mark Carroll about where risk and resilience intersect. Mark, great first and second segment there. In this last segment, I'd like to talk about where the two really overlap. So, my first question is, what should a professional know about business continuity and risk?
Um, I think it's important to know that the continuity space is a subset of risk. It's a component of risk. You've got a broader risk framework, which includes a lot of areas beyond business continuity. And as a result, business continuity becomes a piece of that risk circle, in a sense, a critical piece. And the analogy I would use, Alex, is it's like saying I need to stay healthy. I need to do a whole bunch of things to stay healthy. One of them is good diet. Good diet. Now, will good diet alone make you healthy? No, not at all. Can you do? Can you stay healthy without good diet? Probably not. So it becomes a critical success factor in a sense. It becomes a necessary piece, but not the total equation, not everything. And it's got to be recognized that business continuity is fundamentally sound, necessary, but it's not sufficient in and of itself. It plays in the sandbox with a whole lot of other organizations to create a dynamic that's the most effective for that organization, depending upon what the strategy of that organization. So in some organizations, cyber is top of mind. I mean, when you're holding critical data, et cetera, and you look at cyber risk as a big piece of your world. Now, does the facility that runs a data collection cyber house need 12-foot walls around the building? Probably not. Those walls aren't going to keep the intruders out. The intruders aren't coming in through those walls.
Build
So
big,
it's
build
important to
bigger
recognize.
ladders.
There you go. The ladders are a little bit different. They're poking holes in those walls, and those holes are called walls and firewalls, not physical walls. But that's a whole different ballgame. But the reality of it is, all these pieces are necessary as complete pieces of the risk equation: environmental health and safety, physical security, cyber. We can make the list 2 pages long of all those organizations who kind of live and operate within a risk arena, dealing with the specifics of their own discipline, in a sense, whether it be audit or legal or whatever. They're all essentially risk players. Continuity is one of those players.
So where should, now I have to ask the question, where should continuity or resilience or whatever people want to call themselves reside within an organization? Who should they report up to?
Oh, that's unfair. That's unfair.
Well,
Um,
have to ask.
um, having sat in a continuity seat, sitting under compliance, sitting under operations, sitting under internal audit, sitting under finance. I've been in a whole bunch of different IT. I've been in a whole bunch of different chairs reporting up through the organization. Um, it's a combination of making sure you've got a broad remit in terms of what you've got to do, all right, and making sure that organization you report into has that remit. Now, it's also a function of the honestly the personnel you're reporting into, because you can be in a silo under a group where your management deals with only that silo, or you can be in a situation where you're in a siloed organization, but your management has a broader reach internally. I'll tell you firsthand, um, the best place I can ever remember reporting into was internal audit. Internal audit has got such a level of span of control within an organization and such clout within an organization that we really had a an easy way of dealing with the different directorates within the organization as members of internal audit. Um, that was helpful, but that's a function of that organization, and it may not fit another organization. Um, I would say I would strongly recommend that you stay away from IT roles as a because that brings you back to a the traditional DR function, disaster recovery. And even if that your scope is beyond that, there's a perception that it's not. There's a perception that you're dealing with, servers and networks, and that's your limitation. And that that perspective alone is limiting and creates a problem, I think. Um, in a perfect world, it should be reporting into a chief risk officer, somebody at the senior level who's got a seat at the table at the C level who's dealing with risk holistically. But even that's a question mark because it's not uncommon for a CRO to report into finance, so that independence doesn't take place across the entire firm. The issues are, I've got latitude across other organizations, but within finance, I've got to report into a financial manager. And as a result, my objectivity is a little bit limited. So there's no good answer.
Yeah, yeah. I think it might come back to how we were defining continuity and resilience. It's going to depend on the organization where it's best fit. And you kind of said that, whoever has that remit, you know, that's going, and the influence that comes with that remit, that's where you're going to be, and that's the best spot to be,
Yes,
and
yes,
until something happens, and then someone says, "Oh, maybe we should move this up the ladder somewhere."
right, exactly.
You know, I know myself, I've worked in a spot where currently, actually, the business continuity is now under security because security is now becoming a separate entity under itself because of cyber's influence. So now
Hmm.
it's all sitting in there, and every time you talk about security, you're talking about business continuity. So it's really
Yes.
raised the profile of business continuity now. We kind of dovetailed on what was happening with cyber. We really latched onto it. Do you have any thoughts about that, actually? Latching onto some of these other areas to really boost continuity?
Um, well, the example you cite is a good one, and I'll tell you why. And that is that if we set the clock back a few decades, probably now, we had physical security. We always had guns and guards and gates, right? We always had locking mechanisms and whatever else. We put up cameras and monitored whatever, and we collected data on people moving in and out of egresses and whatever, whatever. But what's happened over the years is we incorporated intelligence into that. So those cameras didn't have an IP address 30 years ago. They do now. All right. The recording wasn't to the cloud like it is today. Those two organizations, security and IT security, have melded in many organizations. And it's difficult to draw the lines between them. And the short answer is don't draw them. Don't draw them in the first place if you're going to struggle with them. Just meld them together because they're one big bucket when you think about it. And
Mhm.
it goes back to one of the cyber events of years ago where they came in and they compromised CCTV cameras. Well, that's because those cameras were decades old, were put in before they were in fact intelligent with IP addresses, and were vulnerable. Now, who's responsible for that? Physical security that put them up 20 years ago and didn't do anything with them, or IT security that should have done something to protect the environment? Both of those organizations have a role in that. And rather than decide who's got the biggest piece of blame, put them together and just solve it.
Actually, that's an interesting point, where because that would be everyone working in their own little silos, right? And
Yeah,
everyone thinks they're more important, but you can be important, but you still need contribution from others. So how do you bring those together? Break down those silos, so to speak, so that risk and resilience and continuity and emergency management, the whole gamut of all those kind of areas work together rather than their own little piece.
sure. Well, and also, Alex, keep in mind that you've got to look at risk and acceptance of risk holistically. So I like to use the example of we've got an RTO recovery time objective for the organization of a day or two or something, and we monetize that to $100,000 that we can live with loss of sales loss. Okay. But our property and casualty insurance policy has $1 million deductible. Why is it that we have a risk appetite of $1 million on the insurance side and 100 grand on the recovery side? How do we harmonize those two? Because what we're
Mm.
saying is my balance sheet can afford $1 million on a Monday, but only 100 on a Tuesday, 100K on a Tuesday. It's inconsistent. Now, should they be the same? Maybe not, but there should be a logical discussion that explains how they align, why they're different, what the deltas are, et cetera. And they shouldn't just be independent random numbers based on
Yeah.
what the organization is willing to do. You've got to look at risk holistically, I think, across all the individual disciplines. And you can't maximize the effects of one without looking at the strength of all the others. The old joke is, you go to the dentist says, "Yay, the teeth are great, but the gums have to come out." Okay. So, meaning it doesn't matter, what I do within my silo if the underpinnings aren't properly structured and strengthened.
And I guess that's our strength as, continuity resilience professionals is to be, should be our strength, is to reach out to all those groups to point those dependencies out, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Well,
I, I,
we've
I
only,
think that
oh, go ahead.
I think there's one more element here too, which is unavoidable, which is there's a natural tension across the risk-based disciplines and silos. And that is that, we're going to put a focus this year in our organization, for example, on cybersecurity. And Alex, you're the cybersecurity person. I deal with business continuity, and I'm the continuity person. And we need to bolster your budget, Alex, by $500,000 to strengthen the environment, add people, et cetera. Well, guess where we're going to get it? We're going to take it away from continuity and give it to your office. So there's a natural relationship battle there over funding, over focus, over importance, et cetera, that takes all of us as risk professionals within our silos and creates a natural tension. And I think that's unhealthy at the firm level because we try to maximize our individual silo at the expense of the others. And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, I think we noted it in one of our previous conversations is what was it? Uh, those who create the most fear get the biggest budget,
Right? At the
right?
expense of the others.
Yeah. We only have 2 minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Um, Yeah, only let's not get caught up in the terminology and the language. So, resilience and risk, in my mind, are really A to Z the same scope. I find it a challenge where people say, "Oh, we deal with the risk side, and separately we'll deal with resilience and recovery." Well, no, risk is all part of the risk umbrella. So I think that it's really important to not get caught up in acronyms in terminology. That's where, to be honest, that's where consultants and contractors can come in and it's a I use the example, it's a dollar for six donuts, but it's $2 for half a dozen. Just because you labeled it differently doesn't mean it's worth more or has a broader scope. The move from DR to BC, that was a step function change. That's a clear step function change for those of us that didn't do continuity in the past that just dealt with data centers. But when you go and you start talking resilience, I would ask, what is that step function change? Beyond a search and replace in your documents, what are you doing differently?
Yeah. And on that note, we've come to the end of the show. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise today. I really appreciate it.
Alex, thank you for having me. This is great. I really do appreciate it.
Who knows? There might be a second time.
Uh, Ring the bell. I'll be there.
Great. Now you're on the hook for it, eh? Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And everyone watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody.
Thank you.